Sign the cremation form or I swear to God I will bury you right next to him. That was my sister Odalis, screaming it across the courtroom. 2 bailiffs on her arms, her wig sliding off. Prosecutor just blinking at her like he'd never seen a human being come apart that fast. I didn't answer her. I looked down at the autopsy photo in my lap. My brother-in-law Dorian, 46 years old, dead on his kitchen floor. And I said, loud enough for the jury, "The form was already signed, Odalis, 11 days before he died." Her knees went first, then her voice. A sound I'd never heard a grown woman make. "I'm Soren Pelletier. I'm 42. Forensic pathologist at the Hennepin County Medical Examiner's Office in Minneapolis. 12 years on the job, 4,000 and change autopsies. And on a Tuesday in February 2023, I cut open a man I'd known since I was 9 years old. Let me back up. Because 3 months before that courtroom scene, I was sitting in my Subaru in the parking garage at work, eating a cold McDonald's hash brown at 6:40 in the morning, reading a text message from my only sister that said, "Dorian passed last night. Please don't come to the house. I can't do faces right now. Don't come. Don't do faces." I read it 4 times. My wife Inez was still asleep at home. I didn't call Odalis back. I called dispatch. And I asked who caught the intake from 4418 Xerxes Avenue South. And that's when the first thing went wrong, because dispatch said nothing had come in from that address. No 911, no EMS, no transport. Dorian Vance, 46, was not in our system. I sat in that parking garage for 11 minutes. Then I drove to Sacramento, because that's where the funeral home was. And I needed you to hear that sentence. She shipped his body from Minneapolis to Sacramento in under 9 hours, before I tell you anything else. So, the origin. My father was a welder. My mother cleaned rooms at the Radisson. Odalis and I were Irish twins. She's 11 months older than me. And she was the star. Honor roll. Homecoming. The kind of girl teachers wrote college recommendations for before she asked. I was the quiet one who spent summers at the library reading forensic textbooks because my grandfather Benyat, Basque, stubborn retired county coroner out of Boise, told me once, and I've never forgotten it, "The dead don't lie, Soren. Only the living need you to pretend they do." 15 words. He said it twice in his life, and I've carried it like a rosary. Grandpa Benyat died in 2009, left me his old magnifying loupe, his autopsy kit, and a letter I still haven't fully unfolded. The loupe smells like him still. Pipe tobacco and the green bar soap he used. Zest, the kind that squeaked when you rinsed it off your hands. I keep it on my desk at work. Every morning I pick it up, turn it in the light, and set it back down. 12 years. Like lighting a candle. My sister went a different direction. Married Dorian Vance at 22. Dorian was good-looking in a Midwestern insurance salesman way. Blonde hair, big laugh, always smelled like Old Spice and Dentine ice. He sold whole life policies for a regional outfit based out of Bloomington. Odalis quit nursing school the week of the wedding. They bought a house in Edina, then a bigger house in Kenwood. Then, in 2021, a 4,400 square foot thing on Lake Harriet with a wine cellar and a stamped concrete driveway that looked like something out of a Hallmark movie. I remember the first time I saw the Lake Harriet house, Inez leaned over in the car and said, "Where is the money coming from, Soren?" I said, "Dorian does well." Inez, my wife, Ecuadorian, a pediatric ICU nurse, the sharpest person I've ever met, just hummed. That hum was the first red flag, and I ignored it for 2 entire years. Remember that hum. It matters later. Here's the thing about being a forensic pathologist that civilians don't understand. You notice. You can't turn it off. At Thanksgiving 2022, I noticed Dorian's hands shook when he poured wine. I noticed he'd lost maybe 18 pounds. I noticed a yellow cast at the edge of his sclera, the whites of his eyes, that I see on my table about twice a week. That Thanksgiving kitchen. I want you to smell it with me, because it matters. Butter and sage in a pan. The hot metal smell of a roasting pan pulled from the oven. Odalis's Chanel cutting through all of it like a knife through a cake. And under the turkey, under the pies cooling on the counter, under the wine she kept refilling in Dorian's glass, something else. A faint chemical sweetness, almost like pear, almost like the cheap liquid in the windshield wiper jug in my garage. I noticed it once. I told myself it was the Riesling. I was wrong. I know exactly what it was now. It was the thing that was killing him, leaving its signature on his breath. I asked Odalis about it in the kitchen. He's fine. He's stressed. Soren, for the love of God, stop doctoring him. Has he seen anyone? He doesn't need to see anyone. He needs his brother-in-law to stop being weird at holidays. I let it go. I'm going to say something now that I will regret for the rest of my life. I let it go because I was tired. Because Inez and I had just lost a pregnancy, our third, and I didn't have the fight in me that night to push my sister. So I ate my mashed potatoes, I complimented her pie, and I drove home. That Thanksgiving was the last time I spoke to Dorian Vance alive. 11 weeks later, he was dead in Sacramento. Let me tell you about Odalis, the version of her the world saw. Charity luncheons, a seat on the board of a children's hospital foundation, Peloton, blonde highlights, a smile that could close a real estate deal. She called our mother every Sunday at 2 p.m. sharp. When Mom got diagnosed with early Alzheimer's in 2020, it was Odalis who moved her into a memory care facility in St. Paul and Odalis who signed every check. Every check. I want you to hold on to that detail, because my mother had a small life insurance policy, $38,000, through her old housekeeping union, and a paid-off townhouse worth about $290,000. Odalis had power of attorney. I signed it over in 2020 because I was grieving my father, grieving a miscarriage, and my sister said, "Let me handle Mom. You handle bodies." I remember laughing. I remember thinking, thank God somebody in this family is organized. Hold that too. Now, the marriage. Dorian and Odalis from the outside were the couple your married friends envied. On the inside, and I only learned this later, from her hairdresser of all people, a woman named Franca, Dorian had filed for divorce 3 times between 2018 and 2022 and withdrawn it 3 times, each time after what Franca called a bad week. Franca told me this in April, in a caribou coffee on Hennepin, crying into a scone. Her hands were covered in little burn scars from curling irons, and one of them had a fresh blister on it, and she kept pressing that blister while she talked, like the pain was keeping her honest. I'm getting ahead of myself. So, February 7th, 2023, Tuesday, Dorian dies, allegedly, in Sacramento, at a Hilton Garden Inn near the airport, where he was, according to Odalis, on a business trip for a client acquisition. Dorian had not worked for that insurance company in 14 months. They'd let him go in December 2021 for reasons the HR director would later describe to a federal investigator as material misrepresentation on commission reporting. She didn't tell me this at the time. I found out in June. Odalis flies to Sacramento, identifies the body, signs for cremation within 36 hours at a funeral home called Willow Chapel Services, which, and this is the part I still can't believe got past anyone, had been cited twice by the California Department of Consumer Affairs in the previous 18 months for premature disposition of remains. She didn't know I knew that. She didn't know I pulled the records. She flew back to Minneapolis on February 9th with a black marble urn and a story. Dorian had a heart attack in his sleep. He looked peaceful. She'd handled everything. She was selling the Lake Harriet house. She needed time. I hugged her at her front door. I smelled her perfume. Chanel Coco Mademoiselle, the same one she'd worn since she was 24, and under it, faint, something else. Bleach. Not cleaning bleach. Commercial grade. The kind we use in the morgue. It clung to the collar of her cashmere like something that had soaked in and dried and been sprayed over. I held her a second longer than I needed to, and when I pulled back, I could feel it in the back of my throat. That chlorinated burn you get from being in the cut room without a mask on. She smiled at me. I smiled back. I can still taste that smile. I didn't say anything. I went home. I told Inez everything. She listened for 20 minutes. Then she said, "Soren, baby." She shipped him, in a box, across the country, in less than a day. I know. Who does that? I know, Inez. Who signs a cremation in 36 hours on a man with no heart history? And that's when I remembered the policy. Dorian had mentioned it at a 4th of July barbecue in 2022, half-drunk, joking, grilling bratwurst. O'Dallas keeps upping the term life. I'm worth more dead than alive now, buddy. He laughed. O'Dallas swatted his arm. Stop saying that. $2.4 million. That's what I learned, 2 weeks later, when I made a very quiet call to a very old friend named Priyanka Bhatt, who works in special investigations at a major carrier. I didn't name my sister. I gave her Dorian's social and said, hypothetical, claim in progress, any flags. Priyanka called me back in 4 hours. Soren. The policy was written 11 days before the date of death. 2.4 million. Beneficiary, spouse. Cause listed, acute myocardial infarction. No autopsy. Cremation completed. Claim filed on day 3. 11 days. My brother-in-law took out a $2.4 million life insurance policy 11 days before he died in a hotel room 2,000 miles from home, and my sister cremated him in 36 hours. I sat in my office at the ME's. I looked at the framed photo of Grandpa Benyat on my shelf. I could hear his voice. The dead don't lie. Only the living need you to pretend they do. And I picked up the phone and called the Sacramento County Coroner's office. Now. Escalation. The first thing O'Dallas did when she sensed me pulling a thread was invite me to dinner. Valentine's Day. Her house. Inez and me. She made osso buco. She poured Barolo. She wore black cashmere and her wedding ring, still, on a chain around her neck. Halfway through dinner, she reached across and took my hand and said, Soren, I need you to stop. Stop what? You called Priyanka. Priyanka didn't tell her that. I found out later who did. Hold that. I said, O'Dallas, I called a friend to ask a general question. About my husband's policy. About a claim process, yes. She squeezed my hand. Hard. Hard enough that Inez saw it and put her fork down. Soren, look at me. My husband just died. I am grieving, and my only brother is treating me like a suspect in his morgue. Do you understand how that feels? I said gently. Then let me see the death certificate. She smiled, and I will remember this smile until the day I die, because it was the same smile she used to give me when we were kids and she'd eaten the last of the cereal and lied about it. Pure, practiced, affectionate contempt. No, she said. Second beat. 3 days later. I get a call from Mom's memory care facility. My sister has requested that I be removed from the approved visitor list. Reason given. Causing distress to resident. I hadn't visited Mom in 6 weeks. I'd been working double shifts. Third beat. A week after that, O'Dallas texts Inez, not me, Inez, a long message that begins, I love you like a sister, but I think Soren is having a breakdown related to your pregnancy losses, and I'd like you to consider whether his behavior is safe for you. Inez showed me the text. Then she said, your sister just tried to isolate me from you. In writing. I saved the screenshot. Fourth beat. My boss, Dr. Ephraim Callio, Chief M.E., 61 years old, 2 divorces, drinks his coffee black with 4 sugars, calls me into his office and closes the door. Soren, I got a call from someone claiming to be your sister. She says you're using department resources to investigate a personal family matter. Ephraim, I made 1 phone call to an insurance contact, on my personal cell, on my lunch break. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, sit down. Shut the door harder. I have a story to tell you about my first wife. He didn't tell me the story. Instead, he said, if your gut says autopsy, get the autopsy. Just don't do it on my dime, and don't put it on letterhead until you can back it up. Fifth beat. The church call. This one I almost forgot to tell you because it was the quietest and the meanest. O'Dallas belonged to a big Catholic parish off Xerxes. Father Eustace, sweet old man, 78, tremor in his left hand, had baptized both of Odalis's miscarriages. She'd had two, in 2016 and 2018, which is a thing I've only said out loud maybe 3 times in my life. Father Eustace called me on a Thursday afternoon. I was standing in line at a holiday station buying gum. "Soren, son, your sister came to me for counsel. She's very worried about you." "Father, she tells me you've been making allegations about you, that the grief is unwell." "Father, I love you. I'm going to say one thing. Ask her about the wine glasses." Silence, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. He said, "Son, what wine glasses?" I said, "Ask her." He called me back 8 days later, and his voice was different, and he said only, "God keep you, Soren. Do what you have to do. I will not speak to her again about this." And he hung up. I have never asked him what she said in the confessional. I never will. 6th beat, early March, the cruelest. I go to visit my mother anyway. They let me in because whatever Odalis told them didn't stick. And my mother, whose short-term memory is Swiss cheese but whose long-term memory is still sharp as a paring knife, grabs my wrist and says, "Soren, your sister was here. She brought papers. She made me sign them. She said you were going to put me in a state home if I didn't." "Mom, what papers?" "The ones that say she gets everything." I sat with my mother for 2 hours. I held her hand. I didn't cry because she was already scared, and if I cried she'd forget why but remember the feeling. When I left, I called an estate attorney named Marin Okonkwo and I said, "I need an emergency competency review and a records request on power of attorney activity. Today." 7th beat, public humiliation, my cousin's wedding, late March, Mall of America Chapel, reception at some venue in Bloomington. Odalis shows up in a white dress, actual white, at someone else's wedding, and halfway through the reception, with 4 glasses of champagne in her, she stands up at our table and announces, loud enough for the next 3 tables, "My brother thinks I murdered my husband. Isn't that fun? Everyone say hi to the forensic detective." The table went silent. My Aunt Itzel put her wine down. My cousin Regulo, the groom, walked over and put a hand on my shoulder and said quietly, "Soren, whatever this is, I'm with you." I looked at Odalis. I said, "Sit down, Odalis." She said, and this is a direct quote, "Make me faggot." My sister has never used that word in her life. I don't know where it came from. I think something was breaking in her. I think something had been broken for a long time, and I just hadn't seen it because she's my sister, and you don't see your sister. I walked out of that reception. Inez followed me. In the parking lot, leaning against our Subaru, she said, "Soren, I think we need to consider that your sister is not a person anymore. I think she's something else now." I nodded. I couldn't speak. And that was the moment something small and quiet clicked in me. Not rage, not grief. Just a small, cold decision. I was going to find Dorian Vance's body, or what was left of it, and I was going to cut him open. Here's what nobody knew. I'd started 3 months earlier, before Dorian died, back in November, after Thanksgiving, when I noticed the yellow in his eyes and the weight loss and the shaking hands. I'd done something I never told anyone, not even Inez. At the end of that dinner, I'd hugged Dorian goodbye, and when I pulled back, I'd kept one of the wine glasses he'd been drinking from, slipped it into my coat pocket. I don't know why. Call it instinct. Call it Grandpa Bignot's voice. I drove home and I put that glass in an evidence bag in my garage freezer behind the frozen peas. I forgot about it, honestly, until February 9th. When I got home from seeing Odalis with the urn, I walked into the garage, opened the chest freezer, and there it was. A wine glass with my brother-in-law's fingerprints and about 4 milliliters of residue. I took it to a friend at a private tox lab in St. Paul. Not the county lab, my friend's lab, a woman named Hedda Prieur, and I paid her $600 in cash, and I said, "Run everything. Metals, glycols, opiates, the full panel." 6 days later, Hedda called me. "Soren, you got ethylene glycol, not therapeutic. Hedda called. Not industrial cross-contamination levels. Poisoning levels. Whoever drank from this glass was being dosed. Ethylene glycol. Antifreeze. Yellow eyes. Weight loss. Tremor. Kidney damage. Classic. That was November. He died in February. Chronic dosing. Building up. She'd been doing it for months. Second thing nobody knew. I'd called Sacramento. The Sacramento County Coroner's Office, 3 weeks after Dorian's cremation, and I'd gotten lucky, because the deputy coroner on duty that day was a woman I'd met at a conference in Orlando in 2019, Assistant Chief Investigator Kenya Dupree. And Kenya, when I explained what I had, said, "Hold on." She called me back in 2 hours. "Soren, Willow Chapel didn't cremate him." "What?" "They got a stop order from our office at 90 minutes before scheduled cremation. Some intake clerk flagged the file because the cause of death didn't match the body presentation. Heart attack doesn't usually come with renal crystalluria. He's in cold storage at a county facility. We've been trying to reach the spouse for 6 weeks. She gave us a disconnected number." Dorian's body was still intact. Dorian's body was sitting in a refrigerated unit in Sacramento, California, and my sister didn't know. Third thing, remember Franca, the hairdresser? Franca came to me in April on her own, because she'd overheard Odalis 3 weeks before Dorian's death, on the phone in the salon bathroom saying, and I quote Franca quoting Odalis, "It's almost done, a few more weeks, and then we can finally breathe." Franca recorded it, on her Apple Watch, because Franca had been through a divorce with a man who drained her accounts, and Franca, her words, never trusted a pretty woman on a quiet phone call again. Fourth, the estate attorney, Marin Okonkwo, pulled my mother's records. In the previous 18 months, Odalis had moved $211,000 out of my mother's accounts into an LLC called Harriet Holdings that she'd formed in 2021. Harriet Holdings owned a condo in Scottsdale, Arizona, that neither Inez nor I had ever heard of. Fifth, the secret ally, the person who'd really been helping me from the beginning. It wasn't Priyanka. It wasn't Kenya. It was my cousin Regulo, the groom from the wedding, who was a staff attorney at the Minnesota Department of Commerce. Fraud Division, insurance specifically. Regulo had come to me in December, before Dorian died, before any of this. He'd said, "Soren, this stays between us. Your brother-in-law's name came across my desk on an anonymous tip about commission fraud. I can't tell you more, but you should know, quietly, that he's being looked at." I'd thanked him. I'd filed it away. I hadn't known what to do with it. On February 10th, I called Regulo back and I said, "My brother-in-law is dead. My sister cremated him in 36 hours. $2.4 million policy signed 11 days before death. I have his tox screen from November showing ethylene glycol." Regulo was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Soren, I'm going to make a phone call, and then I'm going to call you back. And when I call you back, you're going to do everything I say." He called me back 40 minutes later. "It's federal now. FBI, insurance fraud, suspected murder-for-hire conspiracy." I said, "Conspiracy, Soren, listen. They think she had help. We need the glass. We need Franca. We need Sacramento. And we need you to not talk to your sister again until we say so." I said, "Okay." He said, "And Soren, I'm sorry. She's still your sister." And for the first time in 4 months, sitting in my Subaru outside a Holiday gas station on Lindale, I cried. The reversal took 4 more months to build. I want to tell you it happened in a courtroom, but it really happened in a conference room at the U.S. Attorney's Office in downtown Minneapolis on a Wednesday in late June. Fluorescent lights, bad coffee, a long oak table. My sister across from me in a cream-colored blouse, her lawyer beside her, a thin man with a ponytail named Chadwick Reese who kept clicking a pen. The U.S. attorney, a woman named Adaiz Iwarima, was about 5'4", 50, and had the calm of someone who had done this 1,000 times. O'Dallas had come in thinking it was a settlement meeting, about the estate, about Mom's finances. Chadwick had told her, wrongly, that she could make this go away with a civil payment. She smiled at me when I walked in. Actually smiled. She said, "Hi, Sor. Thank you for coming." I didn't smile back. I want to stop the tape here for a second, because there's a thing that happened inside me when she said, "Hi, Sor." And I think if I don't tell you about it, I'll be lying to you, and I didn't come this far to lie. Sor. That was what she called me when we were 6 and 9, when she'd come into my room during a thunderstorm and sit on the edge of my bed and braid my hair, which was long then, and tell me lightning was just God taking pictures. She called me Sor the night our father died. She called me Sor in the hospital chapel the morning we lost our first pregnancy, when Inez was still under anesthesia and I was sitting in a plastic chair staring at a stained glass dove. Sor was the name of the sister I was about to lose. I hadn't lost her yet. Not in that second. In that second, sitting down in that conference room, I could feel her across the table the way you can feel a fire in a room with the lights off. My sister. My only sister. The girl who taught me to ride a bike by running alongside me for half a block on Lyndale screaming, "I've got you, Sor, I've got you," and then letting go, the way you're supposed to. And I remember thinking, very clearly, she is going to disappear in the next 20 minutes. The sister I had is going to walk out of this room in handcuffs, and she is not going to walk back in. Whatever I say to her now is the last thing I will ever say to the version of her that braided my hair. I almost reached across the table. I didn't. I put my hands flat on the oak and I left them there. I could feel the wood grain under my palms. I could smell the old varnish and the stale coffee and a faint note of someone's CK1 from the hallway. I could hear Chadwick's pen click, click, click. I counted 3 clicks. 4. On the 5th I exhaled and I was ready. A daze opened a folder. She said, "Mrs. Vance, before we begin, I want to make sure you understand what this meeting is." My lawyer explained, "I'd like to walk you through what we have, and then we'll discuss what happens next." She slid a photograph across the table. An autopsy photograph. Dorian Vance, on a stainless steel table, in Sacramento, taken 14 days earlier. O'Dallas stopped breathing. "Your husband's body," Addes said, "was never cremated. The Sacramento County Coroner's Office interrupted the cremation on February 9th, 2023, at approximately 11:20 a.m. Pacific. His body has been in our custody since." O'Dallas looked at me. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. Adaizi slid a second document. The independent autopsy, conducted by Dr. Xiomara Bellino in Sacramento, confirmed chronic ethylene glycol poisoning with acute terminal dosing, calcium oxalate crystals in the kidneys, renal cortical necrosis. Your husband was poisoned over approximately 4 to 5 months. Third document. This is a toxicology report on a wine glass your brother removed from your home on November 24th, 2022. It matches. Fourth. This is a recording made by Franca Ostrander on January 18th, 2023, in which you state, and I'll quote, "It's almost done. A few more weeks, and then we can finally breathe." O'Dallas was white. Fifth. This is the insurance application for the $2.4 million term policy, signed by your husband on January 27th, 2023, 11 days before his death. The signature has been reviewed by a forensic document examiner. It is not your husband's signature. It is yours. Chadwick stopped clicking his pen. Sixth. This is the financial forensic report on Harriet Holdings, LLC, including $211,000 in transfers from your mother's trust, for which you had fiduciary duty. That alone, Mrs. Vance, is 11 federal counts of elder financial abuse. Seventh. This is a statement from Mr. Declan Barlow, your husband's former colleague, who has entered a cooperation agreement. He states that you approached him in September of 2022 about, quote, ways to make Dorian go away quietly. That was when O'Dallas lunged at me across the table. I didn't move. Security moved. She got about 8 inches before a man the size of a Sub-Zero refrigerator had her by the shoulders. She was screaming. Not words at first. Then, "Sign the cremation form or I swear to God I will bury you right next to him." I don't think she meant it for me. I think she was still somewhere else, in some other conversation, with some other person. I think she was talking to Dorian. Adayeze Iwarima said very quietly, "Mrs. Vance, you are under arrest." I stood up. I looked at my sister. I said one thing. "I kept the glass, Odalis." That was all. 7 words. I walked out of that room and I drove straight to the memory care facility, and I sat with my mother for 3 hours, and I read her the gardening section of the Star Tribune, and I didn't tell her any of it. The aftermath. Within 2 weeks, Odalis was charged with first-degree murder, insurance fraud, elder financial abuse, and conspiracy. Bail was denied. Chadwick Reese withdrew as counsel within a month, citing a conflict. Within a month, the house on Lake Harriet was seized. The condo in Scottsdale was seized. Harriet Holdings, LLC was dissolved by court order, and $211,000 was restored to my mother's trust. Within 2 months, the cooperator, Declan Barlow, Dorian's former colleague, the one she'd asked about making Dorian go away, testified that Odalis had offered him $40,000 to help her acquire a substance in September. He'd refused. He'd also, it turned out, been the anonymous tipster to my cousin Regulo's office back in October about Dorian's commission fraud, because he was trying to create a paper trail. He'd been terrified of her for 4 months. Within 3 months, my aunt Itzel, the one who'd put her wine down at the wedding, called me and said, "Soren, mijo, I knew at Thanksgiving. I saw her watch him drink, and I said nothing. Forgive me." I forgave her. There was nothing to forgive. None of us had seen it clearly. That's how she'd gotten away with it for as long as she had. She was our sister, our daughter, our niece. You don't see your sister. Franca kept her salon. Kenya Dupree got a commendation. Priyanka Bhatt, the insurance friend. It turned out had been the one who told Odalis I'd called, but not because she'd betrayed me. Because Odalis had called her, claiming to be me's executor, and Priyanka had mentioned the inquiry in passing. Priyanka apologized for 6 months. I told her she'd done nothing wrong. She had, in fact, flagged the claim internally the same day. Odalis called me one time, from jail, collect, October 2023. I accepted the charges because I wanted to know what she'd say. She said, "Soren, I need you to understand. He was going to leave me. He was going to take everything. He was hitting me, Soren. For years." I said, "Was he?" She was quiet. I said, "Odalis, if that was true, you could have left. You could have called me. You could have come to my house. I would have picked you up at 4 in the morning and I would have believed every word." She said, "I know." I said, "But you wanted the 2.4 million. She didn't answer. I said, "Goodbye, Odalis." I hung up. Inez and I bought a smaller house, out in St. Louis Park. Not fancy. Yard with a crab apple tree. We moved my mother in with us in early 2024. She has a first-floor room with a window that faces east because she likes the morning. She sometimes asks where Odalis is. I tell her Odalis is traveling. She accepts this. Tomorrow she'll ask again, and I'll say it again. Inez and I have a daughter now, born October 2024. We named her Benyatsa after my grandfather. She is 7 weeks old as I tell you this. She has my mother's eyes and Inez's temper. I don't do autopsies on family anymore. That's a joke. I never did. Dorian Vance was the closest I came, and even then I only ordered it. Xiomara Bellino in Sacramento did the work. I've never met her. I sent her a bottle of good bourbon in July. She sent me back a card that said, "Cut clean, sleep well." I keep Grandpa Benyat's loop on my desk. I still haven't fully unfolded the letter. Maybe next year. The other day, holding my daughter at 3 in the morning, walking her around the kitchen in the dark, I said his old line out loud, to her, for the first time. "The dead don't lie, sweetheart. Only the living need you to pretend they do." She didn't answer. She's 7 weeks old, but I swear to God she looked at me like she heard it.